Welcome to Helping Organizations Thrive. Today I have Laura Siddall on again. Welcome to you again, Laura.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
No, it's good. I think we sort of we finished a conversation last time. At the end, our debrief on off air was all about how we can look at the whole aspects of the crossover between sport and business. And so we want to sort of tackle that a bit more. But I'll just sort of reintroduce you to the audience again. You are a professional triathlete. And prior to that, you were an engineer. You've been in the British Army. And since you've been in the triathlon world or been professional, you've won 5 Iron distance champions and 4 world champions as an amateur as well. So prolific in what you're doing, and you're now in the US doing some training ready for the season to start in the next couple of weeks for you. So we had this discussion about the whole sort of link between sport and business, and there's a lot of conversations. You know, I work with athletes myself as well as business, and there's lots of parallels there. Interesting to understand, because you've obviously done both and you're in sport right now. What are you seeing as the parallels from your own journey and from your own experience?
Yeah, it's interesting doing sort of, I think, starting in the corporate world and then moving to sport. And then there's things that I see we do in sport that I was thinking like, oh, if I'd realized that or done that when I was in the corporate world, I think how much better it would be. And when I was thinking about it, I think like the big thing for me that sticks out and still is something I personally struggle with, and that's crossing over between the two now, is how important in life in general sleep and your recovery is. So if, you know, as a professional athlete, one of the difficulties I had when I transitioned from, you know, working in the corporate world and training in every other hour I had available, because that's what I love doing, and I would sacrifice, you know, I would sacrifice sleep. I'd get up in the morning, I'd train, I'd go to work, I would maybe do something at lunchtime and then come home and train, and then I'd open my laptop again and work, and I would kind of then sort of survive on that, you know, 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And survive is what it is. Yeah, you know, I used to think, yeah, I'm one of those people that was lucky that didn't need that much sleep. And then, you know, when you become a professional athlete, sleep suddenly becomes part of your job, which I have always struggled to get my head around. You know, I think just from being so busy and packing everything in, and, you know, that's before you even add on, you know, family commitments and that sort of thing. But I think what sport makes you realize is how important that rest and recovery aspect is of your life in order to perform, and that's get the most out of your body, not just physically from the training, but also mentally. And your, you know, so for example, turning up at work and being able to mentally make the right decisions, or emotionally, whatever it is, rationalize, you know, work on, you know, manage relationships, manage conflict, all that sort of thing, is you will do that in a much better state if you are getting the right rest and recovery in order to perform at your best. And I think for athletes, they say sleep is that, you know, number one. You know, a lot of people say, what's the number one recovery tool as an athlete, or what's the number one performance enhancer? And most of the time the answer is sleep. And I think that's where it crosses over into business, but people kind of don't really value that as a tool or as a priority in life, because we just fill it with so many other things. As I said, still not brilliant at it, but I definitely realize, like, if I'm not getting enough rest and sleep in between sessions, it's the physical side is hard, and obviously you don't bounce back necessarily, but it's the mental aspect. And I think that's the interesting thing that then transfers over into business. It's that, like I said, that ability to make decisions, to get things done, to progress X, Y, and Z, to have, you know, it's that sort of thing that I find like it's just like a brain fog, or it's a lot harder than it should be, or you're just not making rational rational decisions. And in business, some people are making decisions in very key, well, some people in life-threatening, life or death situations, where you hope they've had enough sleep and recovery to process things properly. And further, even business decisions where there's a lot of money on the line, sort of thing. I think that's one of the biggest learnings I've then seen that would have been good to transfer back.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of junior doctors have the greatest of sleep,
No.
which is a worry because they are putting people's lives.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a challenge for them. And you're right. I think being mentally, but also physically present, having good sleep is vital in the big decisions we make in a business. And I know it's just money and stuff, but it's important to keep businesses sustainable, and money is part of that, but also the decisions you make on people's lives in their career as well. And there's a lot of talk about sleep being really important, and I know people talk about the 8 hours, but I think there's more to it than just 8 hours. And you said it's interesting how you've obviously, in the world of the corporate world, which you were then fueling your passion, which effectively meant you didn't have a lot of sleep because you're basically burning the candle at both ends. And then you become an athlete, professional, and then you're told sleep's really important for your recovery. In fact, the number one way to recover is through sleep. And then you said you still struggle with it. What is it that you struggle with? If you see that as something, it'd be interesting to understand your mind around that, because some other people might struggle with it as well, and how might they help you or help them to become a priority and to put a place of sleep as that priority to help that recovery.
For me, I think it's, and probably for a lot of people, it's the years of growing, when we grew up and went through school and university and got the job, was it was about being busy and delivering, and that sleep or rest and recovery, it was not seen as a weakness as such. That would be the wrong way around. But I think just that element of talk around performance wasn't fully given credit. It's a bit like seeing a sports psychologist. Several years ago, it was kind of quite taboo in terms of a lot of people viewed it as, oh, there's something wrong with you. Whereas actually, again, that is another element of how you improve your mental game and your performance. And lots of people have performance coaches, mentors, etc., where you are working on that element. So it was based around a guilt feeling for doing nothing, like a guilt for sitting on the sofa or for lying in bed in the middle of the day. Like I just couldn't, and I still struggle, kind of thing, to get my head around doing that. I still am not very good with napping, because conversely, I tend to fill my time with other things that I'm trying to do in parallel with the sport. And I think, again, it goes back to that just concept of always being busy, always doing something, trying to add value or feel valued. And that's the thing I do. I am getting better at sort of, I'll still have the laptop open, but I'll try and sit on the sofa with my legs up, sort of thing, rather than sitting at a desk and things like that. But it was more, and initially when I transitioned into sport, it was kind of that especially when then you suddenly don't have an income. So in sport, transitioning to a full-time professional, not sure then when I'm going to get paid, if I'm going to get paid. It's very much related on my performance, which is a sort of spiral. But at the same time, I felt guilty for sitting effectively what I felt doing nothing, when I felt I should be looking at how I could earn that money or how I could do something to get that, So it was that sort of feeling. And I think the perception and the conversations we have around sleep now, and again, sort of mentorship and sports psychology, is getting a lot healthier, and people are seeing the benefit of it, and how it transitions over.
And it's so easy to get caught up with doing stuff, isn't it? You know, whether you're in a job in the corporate world or you're an athlete, we feel we have to do stuff to get that performance. We have to have an action plan. We need to go about doing stuff and be busy. And people always say, what have you been doing this week? Oh, I've been very busy. I've done this and this. And it's fine. It's okay. We have to do things. I'm not just talking about sitting on the sofa and manifesting performance, because, you know, I don't believe in that. But there's something about, you know, we say we're human beings. You know, let's be a bit more being, as in doing all the time. And actually, there's some real value, isn't there? Not just in the sleep, but actually just resting your brain a little bit, and I don't know, doing something more mindful, just to get more in that present moment. Actually, is quite powerful for mindset as well.
The other way I think about it often is in sport, we do a lot of interval training. And, you know, by that, I mean, during, say, a running session, for example, you'll run at a certain pace and then you take however long, 30 seconds or whatever, or longer recovery. And then that recovery allows you to then run again for that 30 seconds, and then you recover and you go again. And those interval sessions, you know, that recovery that you build into that session helps you then perform in the next interval and hopefully perform better, and you sort of building on that. And I think that's also how we work, or should work potentially in day-to-day life, you know, in small blocks. So it's kind of like 30, 40, 50-minute blocks is how long we can kind of concentrate and work for. And then you need a 5-minute break where you need to get up, stretch your legs, go switch off your head, come back, and you'll actually find that you are then more focused again to carry on that task, to carry on that job. Your body's kind of had a break as well as your mind. And so then you can focus again better for that, like next chunk, that next 50 minutes, whatever it is. So I think it's things like that we should and incorporate into our everyday life, to allow us then to, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, but you can't have so many breaks during a work day, and people will see you going off and think you're not doing anything, because that's that perception that we have to be doing. But actually, for that time that you're then sitting down at your desk or you're in that meeting, you are so much more present and efficient at what you're doing and focused, because you're kind of working in these small chunks of time.
It's like the story of the wood chopper, isn't it? Who sat down and rested and sharpened his axe and actually became more efficient. And the person who kept going got very blunter. And that's an element of like developing skills, but it's also taking some time out to rest, refresh, and get back in the focus again. And I think there's, you know, and it's probably, I think it's harder in the hybrid world when people are working from home a lot more. They tend to just sit at the laptop. They feel guilty to move anywhere, go off and do stuff. Actually, getting up after 40, 50 minutes, I naturally do anyway, because I tend to get sort of not bored, but I like to do something different naturally. So I happen to walk around the house or go for a walk. But, you know, going off, putting some washing in or grabbing a snack or whatever it may be actually is really good for you and get you back in focus again, doesn't it? And I think that sort of cycle, but in a work context, it's a little bit more, you get more interrupted, I guess, in a physical office. So it sort of happens a little bit more naturally. But I think we need to sort of think, and it goes back to that we're not machines, and we need to have some time to rest, to recuperate, to make us more effective in what we do. Another thing I was thinking of the context of sport, and because you have a lot of, I would say, on your performance is obviously looked at constantly, and you know, you're looking at everything you do, every rep, every interval, every run. It's all I mean, when talk about being completely scrutinized, I don't know how your coach does that, and that almost plays into the whole feedback. Now, I'm not saying we should be so analyzed ourselves. What have you learned from the context of using feedback, if you were to go back in the corporate world now, based on how you get feedback and how you're monitored? How would that play out, do you think, for you as a real positive?
Yeah, another area that when I started as a professional, and even before that, I could see like the value. You're right. As athletes, we are constantly getting, almost instant feedback, like data. I have a watch on, it's measuring heart rate, it's measuring pace. On the bike, it's measuring power, speed, cadence, all that sort of thing. We've just been doing some testing of lactate levels as well during exercise. And then at the same time, at a training session, often, if the coach is there, she's eyes on and giving you feedback during the session, encouragement or tips of, like, drop your shoulders are too tight when you're running, or whatever it is. And you're constantly then able to adapt and make changes. And then what I also do at the end of the session, having loaded up data or whatever into the platform we use, Training Peaks, I always write a few comments of like how it went or what I thought, and maybe it's equipment. And part of that is back for her, but part of that is for me, just to sort of capture what it was. And if I need to go back and look at it in future years, it's there. And I think when you then go into the business world, and again, I appreciate it's not hugely practical, is because if you go perhaps to that level, it's sort of micro management maybe. But, we used to have a annual review once a year, and that would be the only time you would kind of really work out how you were doing or where you could improve. And sometimes it was a half yearly and then annual. And I just think there's value and it's probably not through your direct line manager. It might be a business mentor coach within the business that sits in a different area that you can have more regular conversations with about how do you improve? How do you I did this, or I've got this situation coming up, not sure how to approach it, and then after something. And if you look at, at the, after a race, we always sit down and review what went well, what didn't race. And if you look at most high performing teams, sports teams, but also maybe particularly the military, there's always an official debrief after a event, an incident, whatever it is. And it's the learnings that are captured to move forward. And I think that is so powerful if you are getting that feedback. And the other important thing from that in a team environment, which is the same in sport, is like having everyone who's involved in that team has the opportunity and the ability and the confidence to have their view considered. So, we'll sit down, and my view on how things went is equally important as my coach's view on how things went. And that's the same sort of in every member of the team should feel they can contribute to what went well and what didn't go well and what can be improved at every circumstance. So, yeah, I don't think it's hard. You don't get that level of feedback in the corporate world necessarily, but you are able to, even at the end of the day, just sit down and be like, okay, actually that conversation I had with so-and-so I didn't handle it very well at all. What can I do better tomorrow? Or do I need to speak to someone to help with that? It's having those sort of micro review sessions, I think and maybe people do it, but would be beneficial, and then more regularly structured in terms of with your line manager or your boss or whoever it is from that respect. I think more regularly, because if you're waiting to 6 months and the end of the year, like, it's a long time between those conversations to then think of those incidents that they may refer to, but also you've not had that opportunity to make a difference and change and improve and therefore be better for the team and what the business is trying to do.
And how do you, obviously you alluded to the fact that it's not to micromanage people, but to have some sort of ongoing sort of feedback. How does it feel from your perspective right now, where you are monitored in the way you are, and it's quite full on? And what are the dangers of sort of, I guess, overly doing feedback and analysis of somebody's performance in that sense? I mean, it can go the other way, can't it, as well?
Yeah, especially like myself with an engineering brain as such, or maybe you just say it's because I'm grew up as a warrior, and you can kind of get paralysis by analysis, where you are so caught down in the data. And I think when companies do have strong KPIs that they work towards or they manage, like sometimes, and have a lot of data coming into the business, like sometimes you can get too bogged down in that you forget the process of what you're actually doing. And actually, if you focus on the process of the doing and doing it well, the data falls out at the end anyway. I think, as athletes, sometimes, yes, we've got all these numbers coming at us as we're running and riding and swimming to some extent. And sometimes you can get too caught up in, or sometimes they can be shackles, I would say, and you become restricted and you almost become controlled by the data. Whereas if you switch it off and just go with feel, with flow, with being in tune with your body, you can have that next level of performance. And so I think it's getting that balance between using the data in the right way, but not getting shackled by it, and still allowing people to have that freedom, that flow, that their own decision making, their own perceived effort on what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost creating almost boundaries of behavior, I guess, or boundaries of a KPI, and then how you go about it, having that sort of bit more freedom. And yours is probably a little bit more restricted because of the nature of what you do, but having that sort of freedom to be empowered of how you get to that KPI is, as long as you get there with the resources and everything else that you've been given, isn't it?
I think it's using the data as guidance. So, and it's using a KPI as guidance. It's like, and again, you're much more qualified than me to say this, but having a sales company with a sales target, well, surely the target should be to sell as much as you physically can in that year, sort of thing. And yes, a KPI is a good guide to get there, but it shouldn't be your limiting factor of what's stopping you once you've achieved that. You should be like, well, to be the best salesperson I can be for me, for this business, for this company, I want to just sell the most I can. And yes, there's a company target that we have, and I understand why we need to have those, but that shouldn't be your limiting factor of what you can then achieve. No. You should be trying to sort of move on. And that's a little bit the same. Like we should use we use those numbers in training as guidance, and sometimes depending on the session, we sort of stick to them. But other times, if we're feeling really good, it's kind of like, don't let that be the limiter, and that's almost like when you go to the race, you got to use them as guidance, but you also have to be flexible to race dynamics of what's happening, who's riding up the road. Like, do you need to be with them, and that you might have to throw things out the window a little bit, or you just might be on a really good day and you have to ignore the numbers because you've just or conversely, like it might be a bad day and you're nowhere near the numbers, sort of thing, and that you got to be able to manage that as well. So I think that's where it's sort of using that almost, if you break it down into what your job and task is in order to perform in your day business, in your whatever it is for the objectives of the company, what is my process and how can I do that to the very best of my ability? And yes, I've got some numbers and data coming in which is going to help guide me, but ultimately it's that performance aspect, process aspect of just delivering the process to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and I think interesting to talk about sales targets and how people can either they can smash it if they feel, but also be mindful of behaviors as well, because there's you can hit a target in a good way and you can hit a target in a bad way, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
How would that relate in your world of behavior? Because you could probably win races, but how you went about it, or perhaps the training or the nutrition plan was not sustainable, for example, for longevity. I think we've got to be careful about our behaviors as well, because it's not just about delivering stuff, is it? It's how we go about it, and that's important as well. If you sort of tread on people with nothing else, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's all, a lot of it's about being sustainable, isn't it? Being able to manage your performance over time and for that longevity. You know, it's, if I go back to that sleep aspect, and when I was working, and like I thought I could survive on, you know, I thought I was lucky and didn't need much sleep and I could survive on 4 hours a night or whatever, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was surviving, and I wasn't really achieving in either work or sport. I was getting it done, and I was getting it done to an okay level, but it wasn't thriving as such. And I think there's, again, I think actually, you know, nutrition is an area that people just associate with sport. And I think actually is a huge performance benefit enhancer in the workplace, because, you know, the analogy, you know, the Formula One drivers, they're not putting crappy fuel into their car to make it go on the racetrack. And as an athlete, I'm not putting, you know, I'm trying to put good quality nutrients and stuff in my body to be able to perform. And that's partly, you know, mentally and physically. And I think people, if they, and I'm not saying with this, like, you definitely don't need, again, it's like, it's not about being a monk. It's not about being so restrictive with your diet. Like, you know, we have life, we have to live and enjoy it to some extent. But I think that everything in moderation, and actually food and nutrition has such an impact on our performance. And so in a day-to-day job environment as well, actually, which is not probably really seen yet in terms of giving your body the right fuel and nutrition to, again, perform at your desk. But and doing that will allow you to have that sustainability and longevity, rather than, you know, getting away with it for a day or 2 days or a week or whatever, and then you sort of fall down that hole of things. It's how you can back up every day with those same performances, or getting better.
It's interesting how, when we look at sports and we look at how we just talked about some real holistic stuff here. We talked about, you know, mindset. We talked about, you know, nutrition and sleep, and we put sport on a pinnacle of, we want to mirror that because we see it as high performance and winning and all that stuff. But actually, the winning bit is the small part of it. Actually, it's all the other stuff before it. And actually, that's the bits. And that's what we're saying here. And I know more and more workplaces have become a lot more holistic in looking after their staff, making them feel a bit more, you know, take some breaks, mindfulness, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. I'm not just talking, you know, free fruit Fridays, all that sort of stuff, but actually thinking holistically about that. One thing you touched on about when you said you were potentially in a race, and having this sort of freedom to be almost adaptable, to sort of change the sort of game plan, which to me sort of ties in with elements of resilience, because with resilience, you've got to be quite adaptable and be creative. How have you found that in your context of what you're doing now, and thinking back to when you were in the corporate world? What sort of lessons have you learned about resilience in your sport that you perhaps wish you had, or if you were to relay that to the corporate world now?
Yeah, I think resilience is, it's hard to kind of describe it, or to help people like learn how to be resilient. I think you just sort of adapt to circumstance. And I was trying to think on this one, like relating it across. I think in sport, it is such a one. I get it. It's not like, if all the athletes disappeared tomorrow, the world is still going to carry on, kind of thing. You know, it's lucky that we get to do what we do. I'm very fortunate about that. But at the same time, in sport, there's only really ever one winner, the person who crosses the line first, or the team that wins. So more often than not, you are getting knocked back in terms of, if you look at it as a result on paper. And in the corporate world, that's not, depending on your job, obviously, that's not necessarily the case. Like, I could turn up for work and have a really shitty day and not be great at my job, but I'm still going to get a paycheck at the end of a month, relatively. Obviously, if you're really crap, you probably might be exiting the company in a nice way maybe, but on the whole, like those ups and downs in the corporate world are kind of managed out, whereas in sport, like if you don't perform, you don't get paid, sort of thing. And so then it's being very resilient and to those highs and lows, and being able to manage to be able to then turn things around. And part of that, I think, and this is a concept I was thinking about, and also it goes back to what your definition of what is successful for you, what does success mean, but it's working out also what motivates you and what motivates your team to perform and therefore be resilient when things don't plan. Like, is it, and then this is something, again, I think some companies probably do, but I didn't choose to be a professional athlete for the money. Yes, ultimately I need to make it a sustainable living, and I need to work out how I'm going to finance it and how I'm going to win races and that sort of thing to earn money, because we all need money to live on as such. But the motivator was to see how good I could be. And I think when you flip that back and so that's what keeps me going through the highs and the lows of being resilient. It's like, again, like, okay, that race didn't go well, or I'm injured, and what is the process? How do I get better out of this? How do I step back up? And I think then, like, that crossing over to the workplace is understanding what it is that makes your team members tick and motivated. Like, are they driven by salary, or are they actually driven by an extra half day off or an extra few days holiday, or would they just prefer, something else that keeps them going? And can you adapt the way you operate as a team to create, again, I'm sort of shifting it, create that drive, that motivation, but also I think that helps build in then the resilience, because people know where they're trying to get to and why. If that again, kind of, it's a bit cryptic, but yeah.
And when you faced, I don't know, you had an expectation for a race, and then you didn't achieve your expectation, when you get that sort of blow and challenge or difficulty, how have you worked that through? But also, have you worked that through with your team? Because you've got a team around you that sort of works on this. It's not just yourself. How's that process worked, and how do you pick yourself up when it's pretty mentally exhausting and can be devastating in the context of what you're doing? I appreciate it's not saving lives, I know that, but I don't want to belittle what you're doing. It's still great what you're doing. How do you pick yourself up? Because sometimes it's not easy, is it?
So I think when you have a setback, be it a race that doesn't go as well or whatever it is, I think there's a few elements that need to go to it. You have to get time is an element. Like, you have to give yourself time, and often it's kind of, and depending how big or what the incident is, I often kind of go, right, you've got 48 hours to be grumpy, to be shit, to be mulled over, to feel sorry for yourself, kind of thing. And then you need to move on, and you need to assess what went wrong, what went well, and turn that sort of feeling sorry for yourself into motivation to be better next time. And that's where the team is really important, is like, you can have that 24, 48 hours of your own. You do need to process it. You do need to get through emotionally, like, how it is making you feel, and that is okay. Try and take yourself away, perhaps, so you're not necessarily making irrational comments, or that those inner feelings is being put out onto someone else, and then sit down, like we do. I guess we do probably separate processes. I'll probably go through it on my own, in terms of, this went well, this didn't go well, this was how I was feeling, etc., and then I will sit with my coach, and we'll have that kind of conversation as well. And then it's kind of like, okay, so this is what we learned, or this is what happened. What are we going to do differently next time, or what can we do differently? Often, if it's a race specifically, I'll kind of use the time when I leave that location and I'm getting on a flight to go home or to the next place as that kind of like, okay, that's my cutoff. As I get on that plane or as I get it back in the car, I leave all of that behind and I'm just looking forward. Almost the same in a race. One of my earlier coaches used to say, anything that's behind your ears is gone and like is now not relevant as such. It's all about being present and looking forward. Obviously there's an element that you then have to go back to what's behind your ears to just again learn from it. But I think it's that review process. And so again, in business, in life situations, it is giving yourself, if something hasn't gone well, if that's at home with family or if it is in the corporate space, it's giving yourself that time to process it, to be emotional, to be angry, to whatever it is. And that's okay. But then having that clarity and that's where the team can help to sit down and be like, okay, let's go through it rationally. And then the important thing is like, okay, what are the things we're going to do differently, or what are those key learnings that we're going to change or work on more to going forward.
I really like the idea of having that almost 48 hours. I can just be a bit blur, feel sorry for myself, shout a bit,
throw things at the wall.
Rant a bit. I think that's really good, because I think often we feel we have to get it all together straight away and deal with it and move on. But actually, no, just dwell a bit. It's okay, and it's good. And it's good to get those frustrations out. And then also, and it's important also, as you mentioned, is that learning piece, because I think it often, certainly in businesses, we move forward quite quickly. We are on to the next thing now. Actually, what do we learn from that failure? What do we work with that didn't go quite well, that setback? And that's what we use to navigate for the next thing. And I think that's that stopping and reflecting and just healthily sort of critiquing it in a way that's not sort of damaging, but helpful for each other.
The other thing that's important there is to do this not just when something goes wrong or when something isn't at its best, but to also do it when you've had success and you've had a great win at work with your team. It's like, again, go away and celebrate for 24 hours or have that euphoria. But then let's come down and actually go, okay, what is it that worked really well that we can replicate going forward? Yeah. I think that's really key. We tend to always be, again, like you said, you're already on to the next thing. And we very often in sport as well as business, you don't celebrate the successes either. And I think that's really valuable, again, in building that resilience up, to go, actually, we can get there. And this is what it feels like. And let's remember what that feels like. But what is it that we did that made us successful in that moment? And what is it that we can learn, share from that, as well as not just when things don't go to plan. And
what I've learned with talking to you and other sort of sports people, that the debrief is a thing that just happens within the sports world. It's just seems to be quite ingrained in debriefing after a race. Might not be straight away, it might be 24 hours, 48 hours. And often in businesses, I've been in business where we've done that, but in business where we haven't, we've literally just moved on to the next thing. What other sort of parallels have you found, just before we finish, in terms of your world in sport and also in the context of that would be beneficial in the world of the corporate?
I think I'm going to broadly sweep the army into sport, because I guess it's a more physical, but it is high performing team. I think there were some lessons that I've learned in when I'd spent my gap year in the army that I would then transfer as perhaps a coach in sport to athletes, and then I think is transferable back into the business and around leadership, in terms of don't ask someone to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself. Like every member of the team is, and valuing every member of the team, like regardless of their role. Yes, in sport, for me, I'm the athlete, I'm the one on the start line, on the finish line, hopefully on the podium kind of thing. But there is a whole team that goes behind that, and every one of those people is valuable. And I need to make sure they are aware of that value, And that's also through like all working, you've all got that, does everyone know the common goal? Does everyone know how their day-to-day job fits into making the team successful? And however small that job that they do is seen to be done, it is valuable to the overall end result of the team. In the corporate space or whatever, like, do you value the team that come in at the end of the day or the weekend and clean your offices because they're making that environment, like their job is just as important as the CFO, the CEO, in terms of that overall goal, or it should be seen as just important because they're making the environment great for you to work in. And can you imagine coming into work and it looks a mess? And that's not a good atmosphere either. And that's that's the standards that you're setting people and the culture that you're creating. So yeah, I think it's about not valuing every member of your team, making sure they know they're valued, making sure that they know how they contribute to the overall goal, which hopefully is clear for everybody. And then also like not being prepared if you ask somebody to do a job, that you are prepared to do that yourself if need be, so that there is that level of respect and getting your hands dirty as well with everyone else. So I think those lessons from, again, sport plus military, I would take back into a corporate environment if and when that time was right, kind of thing.
Yeah, they're really valuable insights, actually. I think particularly the overarching common goal, purpose, vision, whatever you want to call it. I remember the story of, as it NASA had, that their mission was to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Everybody knew that, whether you were the cleaner in the control room, the astronauts, everybody knew that. It was communicated. Everybody played a part to that. And it's getting as simple and clear as that everybody can tie into that. This job I do will help us get closer to that bigger purpose that we're trying to do as a business. I think it's really understanding that. Just as we finish, Laura, and I do appreciate your time, what's, I guess, going to your races this year, just as what are you excited for as a race that you're doing this year, and then let us know how we can connect with you or get in touch with you as well, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for that as well. So as you said at the beginning, I'm sort of based in Boulder in Colorado, a little bit this morning. That again is to a decision I made to help my performance by being, my coach lives here. And so to be able to have more regular interaction on a face-to-face and daily basis with my coach, and also being in a team environment where I'm training with my squad members. And then, so that's kind of meant that quite some of my races a bit more sort of, we've got it seems to be a South American focus for the year for some reason. But yeah, I start in a race in Chile in a couple of weeks, and then Brazil, and quite an exciting race at the end of the year, I think, hopefully. So yeah, that's, I guess what I'm excited about is doing some slightly different races for me. I always do Challenge Roth every year, which is in Germany, and that's a favorite race. And it has a ridiculously good start list this year. So that's kind of exciting.
Competitive, I guess, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah. a lot of the top women are going to Roth this year, which is exciting because it makes it, it should be a fantastic race, and it's a race that I think it's one of the best races in the world, and it's fantastic to see that race with the caliber of athletes going to it. And then the other thing I'm excited for is the World Championships in Hawaii in October. For this year, it's very different. It's been in Hawaii for however many years in October. Last year, for the first year, we had separate days. So the women raced on Thursday and the men raced on Saturday, which was controversial for many people, controversial for the island. It put a lot of strain on the locals, unfortunately. But from a female aspect and a female athlete aspect, it was fantastic that we had our own day of racing. And then this year, again, there's some controversy around it. They've actually split locations. So the men are racing in Nice, and their World Championships is in Nice, and we are and the women are in Kona. And then it will flip the next year. But what I'm excited about of that is just, again, the women getting their own day of racing and their own opportunity to showcase what female triathlon and what the female race is about and how our race develops and stuff like that. Because often it gets disappeared or shadowed by the men's race being on the same day, and our race gets impacted by that. So yeah, I think that's where I'm kind of excited about those events going forward.
Fantastic. I like a little bit of controversy, and certainly that's helping put women in the forefront a lot more in sport, which is brilliant. Actually, it's really good. I know it's come a long way, but there's still some way to go. Really appreciate your time today, Laura. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.